Rich woman humiliates black waitress, then freezes when she sees who's sitting behind her. The restaurant was an elegant gem nestled in the heart of Manhattan, where the city's elite dined without a second thought about the price of a meal. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the white linen-draped tables, and a soft melody from the grand piano near the bar added to the atmosphere of luxury. The scent of aged wine, fresh herbs, and gourmet dishes filled the air, mingling with the low hum of conversation. It was a place where wealth was expected and exclusivity was guaranteed. It was also the last place anyone expected to see someone like Ava Brooks. Ava had worked as a waitress at Le Chateau for nearly 2 years, balancing heavy trays with grace, enduring long shifts, and dealing with the kind of customers who barely saw the staff as human. She had learned to smile through condescension, to nod politely when patrons snapped their fingers or waved her away dismissively. The uniform, a crisp white shirt, black vest, and long skirt, was always spotless, pressed to perfection, just as the restaurant demanded. But none of it changed the fact that some people still looked at her like she didn't belong. Tonight would be no different. The dinner rush was in full swing when she walked in, the woman who would change Ava's night forever. Victoria Kensington. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention the moment she stepped into a room. Tall, statuesque, with auburn hair cascading in soft waves over her designer dress, she carried herself like royalty. A long fur coat draped over her shoulders, and diamond earrings caught the light as she glanced around with an air of quiet superiority. Her red lips curved into the faintest smirk as she surveyed the restaurant. Ava had seen women like her before, wealthy, entitled, dripping in privilege. The kind of people who expected the world to revolve around them. She took a deep breath, plastering on her best professional smile as she approached the table where Victoria had been seated. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Le Chateau. May I start you off with something to drink?" Victoria barely glanced up. "Chateau Margaux. And make sure it's not from an old bottle. I don't drink leftovers." Ava nodded, accustomed to these kinds of requests. "Of course, ma'am. I'll have that right out for you." Victoria exhaled impatiently and set her clutch down on the table. "And bring me some fresh bread. Last time I was here, it was stale." Completely unacceptable for a place like this. Ava bit back a sigh and simply nodded again, turning toward the bar. As she walked away, Victoria smirked, watching her go. She had always enjoyed testing the staff at restaurants like this, seeing just how much she could push them before they cracked. Power was intoxicating, and humiliating those beneath her was just another form of entertainment. A few minutes later, Ava returned with the wine and a fresh bread basket, setting them down carefully. "Your wine, ma'am. Would you like me to pour a glass?" Victoria arched a brow. "Obviously. Or, do you expect me to do it myself?" Ava picked up the bottle, steadying herself as she poured the rich red liquid into the crystal glass. But as she did, Victoria let out a sharp gasp. "Oh, for heaven's sake." She jerked back dramatically. "Are you serious? Do you not have any control over your hands?" Ava froze, her eyes widening. She hadn't spilled a drop. The wine had gone into the glass perfectly, without so much as a splash. I'm sorry, ma'am." Victoria leaned back in her chair, lifting her arm dramatically as if inspecting herself for damage. "You nearly spilled that all over my dress. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" Ava's stomach tightened. She knew exactly what was happening. She had seen customers like this before, ones who created a problem just to watch a server squirm. "I assure you, ma'am, I was very careful." Victoria's eyes flashed. "Are you calling me a liar?" Her voice was loud enough that a few heads turned. Ava swallowed hard, glancing around. The last thing she needed was to cause a scene.
"No, ma'am.
"I only meant that I was being as careful as possible." Victoria huffed. "Not careful enough. Honestly, I don't know why places like this insist on hiring people who clearly don't belong." She eyed Ava up and down, her gaze dripping with disdain. "Tell me, do you even know how to handle fine wine? Or are you more used to handling cheaper things?" Ava felt her cheeks burn. She knew what Victoria was implying. "I assure you, ma'am, I'm fully trained in." "Then get me another waitress." Victoria cut her off, waving a dismissive hand. Someone more suitable. The words hit Ava like a slap. More suitable. She knew exactly what Victoria meant. The restaurant had gone quieter now, nearby diners watching with uneasy glances. Ava's heart pounded, humiliation creeping in. She forced herself to stand tall, keeping her composure. "I'll get the manager for you, ma'am." Victoria smirked, as if she had won some invisible battle. "Do that." Ava turned away, blinking back the sting of tears. She had worked so hard to keep her job, to prove herself. But no matter how hard she tried, there would always be people like Victoria Kensington, people who saw her as less. What Ava didn't know, what Victoria hadn't realized yet, was that someone else had been watching the entire interaction. Someone sitting just a few feet behind her. And the moment Victoria turned her head, her confident smirk would vanish. Because the person sitting behind her was the last person she would ever want to witness her cruelty. And they were not happy. The tension in the restaurant was palpable as Ava walked away, her shoulders squared, her face a carefully controlled mask. But inside, her heart was pounding. She had dealt with difficult customers before, rude, entitled, condescending. But Victoria Kensington was on another level. There was something almost deliberate about the way she had humiliated her, as if she thrived on making people feel small. Ava's hands clenched at her sides as she reached the service station near the bar. She needed to compose herself before speaking to the manager. "Hey, you okay?" Ava turned to see her coworker, Daniel, standing beside her. He was a busboy, only a few years younger than her, with an easygoing personality that usually helped lighten even the most stressful nights. But tonight, his expression was serious. "Yeah," Ava exhaled. "Just the usual nonsense." Daniel glanced toward Victoria's table and made a face. "She giving you trouble?" "You could say that," Ava muttered, grabbing a glass of water and taking a quick sip. "She wants a different server." Daniel scoffed. "Of course she does." Ava had worked hard to ignore the weight of race in these encounters, but Daniel wasn't afraid to say what she sometimes kept to herself. He had seen it too many times, certain customers walking in and deciding immediately who belonged in a place like this and who didn't. "You want me to talk to Carlos?" Daniel offered. "I'll tell him she's being a nightmare." Ava shook her head. "I'll handle it." She turned toward the back of the restaurant, heading for the manager's office. But before she could reach the door, a hushed murmur spread across the dining room. A shift in energy. Then she heard it. "Excuse me, miss?" Ava turned around just in time to see Victoria freeze in place, her expression transforming from smug satisfaction to stunned disbelief. The color drained from her face, her perfect posture faltering as her gaze locked on the person sitting directly behind her. A tall, broad-shouldered man with dark skin and an unmistakable presence was seated at the adjacent table. He had been there the whole time, listening, watching, and now he was staring straight at Victoria. Ava's breath caught. She recognized him instantly. A billionaire entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and one of the most powerful men in the country. He was dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit, his piercing gaze calm but unwavering. The kind of man who could command an entire room without saying a word. Victoria's lips parted, but no sound came out. "That was quite a performance," Marcus said smoothly, swirling the wine in his glass. "You must be very proud." Victoria blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what was happening. I didn't mean. Didn't mean what?" Marcus asked, setting his glass down. His voice was even measured. But there was an underlying edge to it, a quiet authority that sent a shiver through the air. "Didn't mean to insult her? To belittle hers?" He leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Or did you just not expect anyone important to hear it?" A heavy silence fell over the restaurant. Ava felt her pulse in her throat. This was something new, something she had never seen before. Customers humiliated her all the time, but never had someone like him stepped in. Victoria finally found her voice, though it was unsteady. Marcus, I didn't know you were here." You didn't know I was here," Marcus repeated.
"Right."
"Because if you had, I imagine this whole little spectacle would have gone differently." Victoria's eyes darted around, as if looking for an escape. Other diners were now openly watching. The power dynamic had shifted, and she knew it. "Marcus, please," she tried again, her voice suddenly softer, almost pleading. "It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Marcus echoed, leaning back in his chair. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "Victoria, I've known you for years. I know exactly who you are. And what I just saw, that wasn't the misunderstanding. That was you." Ava felt the tension like a weight pressing on her chest. She had spent years learning to swallow these moments, to move on, to let it go. But now, someone else was fighting back. Someone with the kind of influence that actually mattered in a place like this. And Victoria knew it. She straightened her shoulders, trying to regain control. "Marcus, we shouldn't make a scene." You already did," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharper now. "You just assumed no one would care?" Victoria swallowed hard, her confidence visibly crumbling. "You know what I find fascinating?" Marcus continued. "You sit in restaurants like this, drinking $1,000 wine, treating people like they're beneath you. But what would happen, I wonder, if the world saw this side of you?" Ava's breath hitched. Victoria's face paled. "Marcus, you're on a few charity boards, aren't you?" Marcus mused. "You donate to organizations that preach about equality and inclusion. You love to be seen as the benevolent socialite. But if people saw how you really act, that's not fair." Victoria cut in, desperation creeping into her voice. "I am charitable." Marcus's smile was cold. "And yet, you couldn't spare a shred of basic human decency for a woman serving you dinner." Victoria glanced around wildly, as if willing the restaurant staff to intervene. But no one did. Even the manager, Carlos, stood frozen near the kitchen, unsure of whether to step in. Then, in a final act of defiance, Victoria turned to Ava, attempting to salvage what little dignity she had left. "I'm sure you understand, dear," she said quickly, attempting a brittle smile. "It was all just a silly mistake." Ava stared at her, the words hanging between them like a bitter echo. A mistake. That was how it always went, wasn't it? When people like Victoria got caught, it was suddenly a mistake. Suddenly, it wasn't what they meant, Star. Ava could have let it slide. Could have nodded, played along, kept the peace. But tonight? Tonight, she was done being silent. Ava tilted her head slightly, meeting Victoria's gaze with quiet strength. "No," she said softly. "I don't understand." The words sent a visible shock through Victoria. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Marcus smiled slightly, nodding toward Ava. "Smart woman." Victoria's chest rose and fell rapidly. She turned back to Marcus. "Please, Marcus, you can't." "I can," he said simply. "And I will." Then, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began typing. Victoria's eyes widened in horror. "What are you doing?" Marcus didn't answer. But Ava could guess. A man like him had connections everywhere. One message, one call, and Victoria's pristine social image would be tainted forever. And judging by the pure panic in her eyes, she knew it too. Her mouth opened and closed, but she had no words left to spin her way out of this. Then, with a shaky exhale, she grabbed her purse, stood up, and all but fled from the restaurant. As the door swung shut behind her, the silence stretched for a few moments. Then, slowly, conversations resumed, the restaurant returning to normal. Ava stood still, her hands clenched. Then, Marcus turned to her. "You okay?" Ava swallowed. Then, after a pause, she nodded.
"Yeah,
"I think I am." Marcus nodded once. "Good." Then, without another word, he picked up his glass, took a sip of wine, and went back to his meal. Ava exhaled. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Star. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Kensington had learned what it felt like to be powerless. Victoria Kensington stormed out of the restaurant that night, her heart racing, her mind spinning with panic. The humiliation of being called out in front of an entire room full of diners was one thing, but Marcus Ellington being the one to do it? That was career-ending. Life-altering. As she slipped into the back seat of her black luxury car, she barely managed to choke out an order to her driver.
Home. Now?
Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone, fingers flying across the screen. She needed damage control, and she needed it immediately. The call rang twice before her PR agent, Meredith Caldwell, answered. Victoria, what's wrong? Everything. Victoria snapped. Marcus Ellington just destroyed me in front of an entire restaurant. A long pause. Then, explain. Victoria inhaled sharply. It was just a stupid misunderstanding, she said quickly. That waitress, she was slow. She messed up my order, and I may have been a little harsh. But Marcus overheard, and now he's making a big deal out of nothing. I think, no, he's going to go public with this. Meredith was silent for a moment. Are there videos? Victoria swallowed. I don't know. Find out, Meredith said firmly. And get ahead of it. Victoria nodded, though Meredith couldn't see. How? Public apology. Post something sincere, and do not play the victim. We'll do damage control from there. Victoria scowled, her jaw tightening. Apologizing to that waitress? The thought made her stomach turn. But the moment she opened social media, her blood ran cold. She was already trending. Someone had recorded the confrontation. Multiple people, actually. And the clips were asterisk everywhere. She clicked on one. There she was, sneering at Ava, belittling her in front of the entire restaurant. Then the moment Marcus's voice cut through the air, the shift in her expression was unmistakable. First arrogance, then shock, then fear. Victoria's breath came in short gasps. It was worse than she'd imagined. As the car sped through the city, she tried to focus. She had influence, connections, money. She could make this go away. But deep down, a horrifying truth clawed at her chest. This time she might not be able to. Meanwhile, Ava sat in the break room, still processing what had happened. Daniel nudged her shoulder. You okay? Ava exhaled slowly. I don't know. She should have felt victorious, but there was an unsettling tightness in her chest. Yes, Victoria had been humiliated. Yes, she had been forced to confront her cruelty. But what came next? Then, her phone buzzed. A flood of notifications lit up her screen. Messages, friend requests, tags. She clicked on one, and suddenly, she was staring at herself on video, standing frozen as Marcus Ellington called out Victoria Kensington. Ava's stomach dropped. The entire world was watching. Her fingers hesitated over the screen before she swiped to her messages. One from her mother. Mom, proud of you, baby. The world needed to see that. Her chest tightened. Did she want to be seen? Before she could answer that question, her manager, Carlos, stepped into the break room. Ava. She turned, bracing herself for the inevitable.
Yeah.
Carlos hesitated, then scratched the back of his neck. Marcus Ellington asked to speak with you before he left. Ava's pulse spiked.
What?
Carlos shrugged, said he'd wait outside. Ava exchanged a glance with Daniel before standing, legs shaky. Marcus Ellington wanted to speak with her? She stepped outside and found him leaning casually against a sleek black car. The city lights glowed behind him, casting long shadows on the pavement. He looked up as she approached.
Ava.
She swallowed. Mr. Ellington. His lips quirked. Marcus. She nodded slowly. Marcus. A pause. Then, how are you feeling? Ava hesitated. Honestly? Overwhelmed. Marcus exhaled, nodding. That makes sense. What happened in there? I know it put you in a difficult position. She studied him carefully. Why did you do it? A small smile played on his lips. Because I've seen people like Victoria my whole life. They think money gives them the right to treat people like dirt. And sometimes, they need to be reminded that it doesn't. Ava crossed her arms, trying to suppress the emotions welling up inside her. And now, Marcus's expression softened. Now, I make sure this isn't just a viral moment that fades away. That it means something. Ava frowned. What do you mean? He reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek business card. I own multiple restaurants across the country. Fine dining, casual spots, everything in between. I'm launching a new initiative, one that focuses on fair wages, respect, and opportunities for career growth in the service industry. He extended the card to her. I want you to be part of it. Ava stared at him, her heart hammering. Me? Marcus nodded. I've read about you. You've been working here for years. You're sharp, hardworking. You know what it's like on the ground level. I need someone like that. Ava's breath hitched. You're offering me a job? Marcus smiled. I'm offering you a seat at the table, asterisk. Ava's fingers curled around the card, her mind spinning. Everything she had worked for, struggled for, was this really happening? She looked up at Marcus, her throat tightening. I don't know what to say. Marcus chuckled. Say you'll think about it. Ava let out a shaky breath. I will. He gave her a nod before stepping into his car. Good. I'll be in touch. As the vehicle disappeared down the street, Ava stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the card in her hand. Tonight had started as just another shift. Another battle against people like Victoria Kensington.
But now?
Now, everything had changed. And for the first time in her life, the future looked limitless. Ava sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at Marcus Ellington's business card. It had been 2 days since that night at Chateau Lumiere, 2 days since her life had been turned upside down. The restaurant's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the videos went viral. People from all over were calling to praise Marcus for standing up to Victoria Kensington, and even more were reaching out to support her. Customers left extra tips. Strangers sent kind messages. Even her manager, Carlos, had started treating her with more respect. But none of that compared to the emails sitting in her inbox. Marcus hadn't been joking. He was offering her a position at his company, one that would give her a voice in shaping the policies of his restaurants across the country. A real chance to make a difference. It was everything she'd ever wanted. So, why did she feel so hesitant? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She set the card down and padded across the small apartment, opening the door to find her mother standing there, arms crossed, a knowing look on her face. Figured you'd be overthinking things, her mother said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Ava sighed, shutting the door behind her. I just don't know if I'm ready for something like this. Her mother sat at the table, picking up the business card. You've been ready. You just don't believe it yet. Ava bit her lip. It's a huge responsibility. Her mother nodded. And what you do now matters. Not just for you, but for every worker who's ever been treated the way you were. She placed the card down and met Ava's gaze. So, what are you afraid of? Ava hesitated before whispering. Failing. Her mother reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You won't. Ava exhaled slowly. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe it was time to take the leap. Meanwhile, Victoria Kensington was facing a nightmare of her own. Victoria sat in her dimly lit penthouse, gripping a glass of wine in her manicured fingers. The once pristine space was now cluttered with newspapers, magazines, and printed-out tweets, each one condemning her. Her face was plastered all over the internet, and none of it was flattering. News outlets were running headlines like, she had lost sponsorships. Business deals were slipping through her fingers. Her PR team had crafted an apology, but no one was buying it. The damage was already done. But the worst part? The silence. People who used to flood her phone with invitations and compliments had suddenly vanished. Calls went unanswered. Messages left unread. Her world was crumbling. She set the glass down and pulled out her phone, hesitating before clicking on Marcus Ellington's name. After a deep breath, she typed out a message. Marcus, can we talk? The message was marked as read within seconds. But no response came. Her stomach twisted. For the first time in her life, Victoria Kensington was powerless. Ava stood outside a sleek glass building in downtown Chicago, nerves buzzing in her. She had said yes. And now, she was stepping into a world she never thought she'd belong in. As she entered the lobby, a woman at the front desk greeted her with a warm smile. Miss Williams? Ava nodded. Mr. Ellington is expecting you. She was led down a long hallway and into a spacious office, where Marcus stood by the window, overlooking the city. He turned as she entered, a proud smile on his face. "You came?" Ava took a deep breath and smiled. "I came." Marcus gestured to a seat. "Welcome to the team." As she sat down, a sense of certainty settled over her. For years, she had endured people like Victoria Kensington, believing she had no power.
But now?
Now she was rewriting the rules. And this was just the beginning. That you'd like any changes.